The smell of burning wires invaded the building like a whispered warning. On the third floor, James Cole was spinning his coffee mug with steady hands, staring at the window as if he sensed something. Outside, it was just another Sunday. But inside that old building, time seemed to hold its breath. No alarm sounded, no warnings were given. The fire started stealthily on the second floor, and within minutes, smoke was already licking the walls of the hallways. Residents were running, screaming, banging on doors in desperation, but in apartment 306, there was only silence. James got up calmly. He put on an old military jacket, tied a wet cloth to his face, and grabbed a combat flashlight. While everyone tried to get down, he went up. Why? Who was this man who seemed to know exactly what to do, even when everything was falling apart around him? What he was about to face may surprise even you. Stay with me, because what comes next, no one expected. The muffled explosion shook even the pictures on the wall. The next second, the entire building fell into a heavy silence, broken only by muffled screams and the cracking of structures giving way to the heat. The main staircase disappeared in flames. Children cried, trapped in the hallways. A woman knocked desperately on her neighbor's door, her eyes filled with smoke and fear. James didn't run. His steps were steady, almost slow, as if every movement had been rehearsed years before. Smoke was already seeping through the cracks under the doors, and the air was burning his eyes. But he seemed to see beyond that. Maybe he could see the past, the days of patrolling the jungle, the faces of the men left behind, the missions where no one could hesitate. In the hallway, he passed a cracked mirror. For an instant, he saw his reflection, blurred by smoke and time. The stained military jacket, the cloth wrapped tightly around his face, the hard but moist eyes. The memory of a fallen comrade flashed through his mind. The smell of fire always brought back the names he had never forgotten. If you have ever felt the weight of a memory, or know someone who carries invisible scars like his, comment below what has touched you the most so far. These stories only exist because you are there, listening, feeling, living them together. And when you like or share this video, it's not just a number that grows, it's the voice of these veterans, these memories, that goes further. Subscribing to the channel is more than just following content. It's being part of a community that honors those who don't give up, even when everything seems lost. And in that moment, amidst the ashes and the screams, James did something unthinkable. He didn't go down. He went up another flight. Because there was something, or someone, that wasn't safe yet. The children's cries were louder than the crackling of the fire, and yet no one seemed to hear. The mother was shaking so much that she could barely keep the cloth over the little ones' faces. The heat burned the skin, and smoke came in through the windows as if it had a life of its own. The ground was already beginning to vibrate from the cracks in the structures, and the ceiling was coughing up soot. Every second felt like hours. James emerged from the chaos as a calm figure, but there was something in his eyes that made it clear. He had seen this before. And worse. He knelt in front of the children, lowering his body to their level, pointing to the floor, and instructing in a firm, calm voice. Feet down. Breathe through the cloth. Eyes on me. His mother hesitated when she saw the back stairs. Rusted, with loose parts, it looked more like a trap than an exit. James said nothing, just walked toward the hallway, picked up the fallen grab bars on the floor, tore the sheets from the closet, as if he knew exactly what he needed. He made quick ties, reinforced the breaking points, pulled the steps with his own body weight to test. You can handle it, but you have to trust. The woman took a deep breath, and even with her legs shaking, began to descend with the children. One step, then another, and another. With each movement, the structure creaked as if it were going to scream in pain. But she descended. They descended. Alive. But James didn't go with them. By the time the three of them reached the solid ground, he was already back in the hallway, engulfed in smoke once again. It didn't make sense. He had already done his part. He had saved lives. He could have gone out a hero. But he didn't. there were still more people inside, and for him, leaving someone behind was never an option, even if it meant losing his own life. On the way back, the scene was even worse. The heat made the air unbreathable. Pieces of the ceiling were already falling down in sparks. The afternoon light barely penetrated the thick curtain of smoke. A man was running down the hallway, eyes wide, stumbling, banging on doors. He was panicking, without direction. James grabbed him firmly by the shoulders and pressed him against the wall. "Breathe. Listen to me. Close your eyes. Remember your family. Now follow me." The man fell to his knees. He was coughing, crying. James lifted him with effort, almost carrying him, and guided him to the back stairs, which were still holding. But there was already something different in his eyes. Tiredness. A lot of tiredness. The kind that doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. When he returned, he found no one else in the corridors, just closed doors and creaking walls. Until, at the end of the corridor, he heard a faint cry. It was of a baby. James forced the door open with his shoulder until it gave way. Inside, a woman passed out on the floor, and a months-old baby wrapped in blankets, crying softly, barely breathing. The woman was unconscious, but still alive. He placed her on a mattress, tied sheets around her, and pulled as hard as his 88-year-old arms would allow. The baby he carried in his arms, pressed against his chest. The descent was slow. The heat had already deformed parts of the ladder. The iron burned the skin on his hand, and the structure threatened to break at any second. The sheet tore as he dragged it. James felt his vision blur, his heart beating so hard he could almost hear it in his ear. But he didn't stop. Every step was a battle. Every step was a choice. In the courtyard, neighbors screamed and applauded as they watched the old man appear at the top of the stairs with a baby in his arms. The newly arrived firefighters were paralyzed when they saw the scene. He went down, slowly, steadily. The last step gave way under his weight, but someone caught his arm at the end. A young man. Perhaps the same one who had ignored him in the hallway earlier. James placed the baby in the rescuer's arms and collapsed to his knees. Not out of weakness, but out of relief. While he was being attended to by the paramedics, someone tried to ask his name. He just pointed to the pin on his jacket, his gaze lost between the smoke and the memory. It was as if he wasn't there anymore. As if, inside, he was still in another fire. An old one. One of those that doesn't burn down buildings, but burns from the inside. And when a nurse asked what motivated him to do all that, he replied in a whisper, "The war doesn't end when you come back. It just changes location. If this touched anything inside you, just comment on one sentence. I understand this pain. Because no matter how different we are, everyone carries some invisible battle. And there's still more you need to know. There's something no one in that building knew about James. Something that completely changes the way everyone starts to see him. On the second floor, the heat seemed to come from inside the skin. The walls had no color left. They were a pulsing mass of smoke, soot, and cracks. The fire howled behind the doors like a maddened beast, and the air billowed so thick it hurt to breathe. Each step James took was a brutal effort against his own body, which no longer responded as before. But he continued, as if there was something beyond the pain, something stronger than fear. He knocked on doors like he did on rescue missions. An old, almost forgotten code. 2 rings, pause, 3 rings. Whoever was on the other side would understand. And they did. A lock turned with difficulty. The door opened just enough to reveal an old, sweaty face covered in terror. Behind it, a woman coughed on her knees, blood on her lips and eyes red from smoke. James entered without hesitation. The apartment was small, stuffy, and already engulfed in flames in one corner. He pulled a dresser with his own body, made his way to the back window, tore open the curtains to make a makeshift damp sheet, and tied it as best he could around both of their wrists. The man was shaking. His cane was slipping from his hand. He tried to say something, maybe a thank you, maybe an apology for being slow. But James gave him no room for hesitation. Go. Now. Think later. He led the couple silently to the emergency staircase. The structure was already threatening to collapse, but it was still standing. They climbed down as best they could, shaking, panting, holding on to each other. When their feet touched the ground, they both cried. But James didn't stop to watch. He had already disappeared again. He came back. Because there was more. There was always more. As he walked back down the hallway, a loud bang threw his body against the wall. It was the gas pipe bursting under pressure. He stood up slowly, pain shooting through his ribs. His vision shook, but his resolve did not. On the opposite wall, a half-open door revealed a small figure huddled in the corner of the room. A girl, no more than 14, hiding under the bed. She was shaking so badly she could barely move. James crawled over to her, lay down on the floor to pull her without scaring her, and looked straight into her eyes. "You will get out of here, but you have to trust." She just shook her head. Panic was greater than logic. He didn't argue. He grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around the girl's body, and pulled her into his arms as he had done dozens of times before. Decades ago, on foreign soil, with boys who didn't even know why they were fighting. The weight of the smoke on his shoulders was almost physical. The stairs threatened to give way at any moment, but he descended with the girl, as if carrying the past. And when he finally put his feet on the ground, he was not greeted with applause. Just looks. From those who didn't know what to say in the face of something so human, and so impossible, he barely had time to breathe. A police officer approached with a hard expression, wanting to understand what an old man was doing in the middle of that confusion. "You should be getting help, not walking around." James just stared into the agent's eyes, soot-stained, heat-cut, but steady. "There are more people inside." And without waiting for an answer, he turned and entered the building for the third time. As he climbed the crooked steps again, a memory came rushing back to him. The night his platoon had been trapped in a burning village. He was the youngest of the team, but he was the only one who came back. With 3 living men in his arms. He never spoke about it, not even to his wife, who had already passed away. It was one of those truths that hurt too much to share. And now, so many years later, he was reliving it. Not by choice, but out of conviction. Inside, the floor of the 3rd floor was soaked in water and smoke. Pieces of ceiling fell with a loud crash. James could barely see. But he listened. A faint sound. A lament. As if someone were calling without a voice. He followed the sound to the end of the hallway. The door was locked. He used his shoulder. The wood broke on the 3rd try. Inside, a woman was lying near the stove. Her head was bleeding slightly. She was unconscious. James lifted her up as if time had turned back, and he was still strong. Every muscle screamed. The pain in his back was excruciating. But he walked. He lowered her down on his shoulders, using the same combat evacuation technique. The staircase was on fire. He threw her out of the 2nd-story window and into the arms of a firefighter, then jumped out. He broke 2 ribs, but he didn't complain. Lying on the floor, his body in shock and his breathing short, he heard someone say, "That man is crazy." And another, younger, replied, "No, that man is a soldier." It's curious how, even after so much time, the label they try to give you in old age can be swallowed up by what you really are, in essence. And the hidden truth behind James's story had yet to be revealed. There was something about that antique brooch pinned to his jacket, something that no one there recognized, but that would completely change the way everyone saw that man from that day on. Write in the comments, sincerely, "I know a hero when I see one." Because there are people who carry medals, and there are people who carry lives. And there's something about that symbol pinned to his jacket that still needs to be told. The sun was beginning to set behind the heavy clouds of smoke when James reached the 3rd floor once more. His body no longer responded as precisely as it had minutes ago. His legs were shaking. The pain in his chest throbbed like a muffled drum, and each breath was a scratching sound inside. but he knew there was still someone there. He always knew. The door to apartment 308 was ajar, and the smell coming from it was different. More acidic, more aggressive. When he pushed it open with his shoulder, he found the floor covered in broken glass and a thin layer of soot. In the corner of the room, a teenage girl lay on her side, her arms curled up, completely still. Her face was pale, her lips were purple, her clothes were stuck to her body with sweat. James didn't hesitate. He ripped off one of the closet doors and, with improvised strips of bedsheet, tied the girl's wrists and ankles to stabilize her on the board. With each movement, he felt his fractured rib hurt, his vision darken, and his heart threaten to fail. But that didn't matter. There was a mission underway. When he emerged into the parking lot, slowly descending with the makeshift stretcher on his shoulders, he looked more like a ghost than a man. The crowd fell silent. The young man who had earlier shouted for him to leave was now running toward him, tears in his eyes. I'll help! Give her to me! Please, sir! James handed over the stretcher firmly, but said nothing. He just looked into the boy's eyes and asked, as if testing character, "Now do you understand?" The boy nodded with a lump in his throat, but James had already turned his back. The crowd began to notice. The faded cap had something embroidered on the sides. A strange symbol. A golden triangle with a snake crossed by a black stripe. Some whispered, trying to remember where they had seen it before. Others just watched in silence, sensing that there was something much bigger behind this old man. As he returned for the fourth time, someone tried to stop him. "Enough! You can't take it anymore!" But he didn't listen. Or he chose not to listen. Inside the building, now filled with darkness, he stumbled for the first time. He fell to his knees. His hands on the scorched floor, his knee tearing the fabric of his pants, blood slowly flowing. He remained there for a few seconds, motionless, as if deciding whether to continue or rest. It was then that he heard a voice inside his own mind, a memory. It was Sergeant Miller, their commander in the jungle, shouting over the gunfire. "As long as there's one person alive in there, the mission isn't over." James struggled to his feet. The ceiling of the central corridor had already collapsed. It blocked access to the left side of the floor, but he knew that there was a man in a wheelchair who lived in that block. At this point, no one was expecting to rescue him. James grabbed a metal bar and began pushing the rubble away, one by one. His hands burned, his fingers trembled, and yet he kept going. He managed to open a gap, enough to pass by. And there was the gentleman, slumped beside the chair, his face dirty with soot and his eyes half closed. "I thought it was the end," the man murmured. James just put his arm under his armpits and started dragging him down the hallway. With effort, with pain, with his entire body collapsing. And it was there, on that crossing, that something fell out of the inside pocket of his jacket. A small, rigid object. A reporter who had come in with the firefighters picked it up off the ground. It was a military coin. But not just any coin. It had a rare Department of Defense sealed number, engraved with a name, James R. Cole. And below that, 2 words, Joint Rescue Command. The most experienced firefighter, upon seeing the coin, opened his eyes wide. This isn't just any veteran. This man has commanded missions that aren't even public. The reporter didn't understand. But the fireman explained in a low voice, as if revealing something that should be buried. These guys were trained to go into areas where even helicopters refused to go. They didn't just save civilians. They saved abandoned soldiers. They never left anyone behind. On the sidewalk in front of the building, as they loaded the last rescued person into the ambulance, James staggered. His eyes were almost closed, and his face was gray with exhaustion. But he was still searching with his eyes. And when he was sure everyone was safe, his knees finally gave way. He fell, but he fell in peace. Someone shouted for help. The paramedics rushed over. He was still conscious, but weak, very weak. On the stretcher, before being taken away, he looked up at the sky and murmured, almost like a whisper to himself, "Today, mission accomplished." Comment here, mission accomplished, James. Because what this man did was beyond any rescue manual. And there is still more about him that the world needs to know. James's body was defeated, but his soul, still restless. Sitting on the sidewalk, covered in soot and sweat, with his knee raw and his heart beating out of rhythm, he looked around as if searching for something that no one else could see. The sound of the sirens was already mixed with the crying of the victims and the crackling of the burning wood. Firefighters ran, neighbors hugged each other in shock, and some just watched, as if trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The paramedic who attended to him tried to lay him down on a stretcher, but James refused with an almost imperceptible gesture. He got up, albeit unsteadily. His legs threatened to give way with every step, but there was a dignity that kept him standing. "I can't. I'm not done yet." Someone tried to protest. A police officer, maybe a lieutenant. "You have already done more than anyone here. Please go to the hospital." But James just looked into the boy's eyes and replied with a calmness that cut like a blade. "When you've buried brothers who cried out for help and no one came, you learn not to leave before counting every face." And he walked slowly towards the group of residents, observing them one by one. Mothers with their children, the elderly, the boy who helped carry the teenager, the woman crying on her knees with a baby in her arms. James said nothing. It only counted, like someone checking a battalion's roster, until he finally nodded, silently. But it was at that moment, just when everyone thought he would finally give in to rest, that a sound broke through the crowd. Applause. One, then another, then many. It wasn't euphoric applause. It was heavy, deep, full of something that most of the people there had never felt before a stranger. Respect. And then the reporter came. Microphone in hand, camera on, voice trembling with emotion. "James Cole, you saved 17 people today, almost single-handedly. What motivated you?" James took a deep breath. His eyes were watery but steady. His cap was dirty with ash. His face was lined with decades of wear. "It wasn't motivation. It was duty. I just did what had to be done." The reporter tried to go deeper. "But how? At 88 years old? Where did you learn all this? Who are you after all?" He hesitated, as if each word required strength. "I'm just a forgotten name on a wall, a number that no one reads anymore. But today, I was useful again." Behind the news crew, one of the firefighters approached. He was a tall man, his face hardened from service, but his eyes shone like a boy's. He reached out to James and, without saying a word, handed him something. A small object, wrapped in a dirty cloth. James opened it carefully. It was the military coin that had fallen out of his pocket, but now it was clean. The metal gleamed, and on it, hand engraved, in an improvised way, "Today, everyone is alive." James held the coin as if it were his heart beating outside his chest. He took a deep breath, and for a moment there seemed to be no more pain, no more heat, no more tiredness. Just silence. A silence full of meaning. The transformation that took place that afternoon was not just in the building, nor just in the lives saved. It was also in the mindset of everyone who watched. People who, until that day, thought heroes wore capes, or that were already buried in the past. But there, standing, bleeding, and smiling, was a living reminder that courage has no age, and that true impact comes from simple decisions, made when no one else dares to act. The fire chief approached with the press. There was a badge in his hand. "Mr. Cole, with the permission of the city fire department, we would like to appoint you as an honorary member of the rescue squad." James smiled with one corner of his mouth. He took the badge, looked at it for a few seconds, and said, "I accept, but on one condition." Everyone fell silent. May you remember all the anonymous people who save someone and never win a medal. Because deep down, it's for them that I came back. Wait, comment here. For them, I would go back too. Because there's still one last detail about James Cole that no one has noticed. And it's etched into his own past. James was sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, his body covered by a thin, soot-stained sheet. His knees bent, his arms resting on them, and his head tilted slightly back, staring at the gray sky that was beginning to open. A small beam of sunlight passed through the smoke from the fire, as if it wanted to touch that silent man, who until a few hours ago was invisible to everyone. But now it was different. A nurse approached slowly, with a glass of water in her hands and curious eyes. She glanced at James's torn coat and saw something that had almost gone unnoticed during all the chaos. A brooch pinned to the left side, slightly askew, half covered in soot and sweat. Small, very rare. She bent down, cleaned it carefully, and asked in a low voice, almost in respect, "Is this symbol military?" Before James could answer, someone behind her murmured in astonishment. A young firefighter, accompanied by another man with gray hair and a trained gaze. The older man came closer, bent down, and without touching simply said, "This is from the 5th Jungle Rescue Unit, Vietnam, 1971. These men left no man behind." There was an immediate silence around them. Those nearby stopped what they were doing. They looked at the brooch, at the man carrying it, and then at the still smoking building behind them. James smiled slightly. No vanity, no fancy words. He just said, "We haven't left yet." That's when the penny dropped. That silent man, the old man on the 3rd floor, whom many ignored in the elevator, was part of one of the most secret and respected units in military history. They didn't wear medals on their chests. They didn't give interviews. Most of their achievements were never officially recorded, but those who knew the weight of carrying that symbol. The reporter who had been trying to interview me before was now standing a few feet away, her eyes fixed on the scene. She didn't raise the microphone. She didn't insist on asking questions. She just stood there, staring, as if she finally understood the magnitude of her presence. One of the boys James had saved, maybe 12 or 13, walked up to him, his hands dirty and a drawing in his hand. It was simple. A building on fire, and a man in a cap pulling several people with a rope, like a human chain. James took the paper with still shaking hands. He looked at the boy. "Did you draw this?" The boy nodded, embarrassed. "I tried to remember what you looked like in there." James stared at the paper for a few seconds, his eyes filled with tears. But he took a deep breath and said, "You remembered well. Better than most people." At that moment, something inside the square changed. The people, previously dispersed, formed a small circle around him. It was not a noisy crowd. It was as if everyone there was witnessing something that could not be explained with words, only with feelings. The mayor of the city arrived moments later. He was wearing a wrinkled, sweaty suit, and his tie was out of place. When he saw James, he walked straight up to him. He held out his hand firmly. "You saved us, and you saved what was left of our faith in humanity." James, with great effort, stood up. He shook the mayor's hand, looked him in the eye, and answered bluntly, "I just did what everyone was supposed to do, but most people forgot." The mayor wanted to hand over the key to the city, a symbolic act. But James refused. "Keep this. Give it to someone young, who is still deciding what kind of man he wants to be." He then took the brooch off his coat. He wiped it with his thumb. He walked over to the younger firefighter, the same one who had tried to stop him from entering the building. He placed the brooch in his hand, closing his fingers tightly. "You'll need to remember this one day. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about going in even though you're shaking." The young firefighter began to cry. He didn't know whether he should thank them, apologize, or simply remain silent. So he did what he could. He saluted. At that moment, James looked around at everyone. His eyes were no longer searching for victims. Now they were searching for conscience. Because, more than saving lives in that building, he had rekindled something that many had already considered extinct: the notion of honor. And even though he was hurt, even though he was broken, there was a different light in his eyes. As if he knew that, for the first time in a long time, someone was actually listening. Write in the comments, true courage still exists. Because what James carried in his chest goes far beyond a blowjob. And the origin of this story, the true reason behind the mission he never abandoned, has yet to be revealed. The sun had not yet fully risen when the first flower was left on the doorstep of apartment 306. It was a white rose, without a note, just placed delicately on the worn doormat. Hours later, more arrived. Flowers, letters, children's drawings, messages written in colored pencils, full of innocence and wonder. The hallways of the building, previously silent and faded, now seemed to breathe new life, as if each wall had heard the story and decided to rise up together. James opened the door slowly that morning. He was wearing the same coat, now washed but still marked. He walked down the hall with slow steps, not out of fragility, but out of reverence. He picked up each flower with both hands, as if holding memories. And when he saw the drawings taped to the wall, he couldn't help but sigh deeply. On one of them, a child had drawn red flames, a crooked staircase, and a man in a cap holding a flashlight that illuminated everyone around him. On top of the paper was a simple sentence: "This man is my hero, even if he doesn't know my name." He held that paper for a while longer. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them firmly. He had never been one to let himself go. Not when he lost companions, not when he was forgotten, not now. As he read the notes, some signed by names he didn't even recognize, he heard a voice behind him. Major Cole. He turned around calmly. It was the woman from 204, the same one who months ago had been pulling her bag tightly as she entered the elevator with him, as if her presence were bothersome. She was holding a basket of bread and fruit. This is to say thank you. And to apologize too. James didn't answer right away. He just took off his cap, ran his hand through his thinning hair and said, "No need. Life changes when we learn to see things differently." She stood still for a while. Then, with a choked voice, she replied, "You were the one who taught me that." That same morning, in the courtyard of the building, two teenagers were arguing. One of them had scribbled something on the outside wall, a common gesture, but was reprimanded by the other. "Hey, this wall has a history now. Respect it." They were the same boys who used to laugh at the old man with the cap, the strange man who spoke little and wore an out-of-season coat. Now they argued to protect what they had previously ignored. The transformation there was not just structural. The city government had already announced the reconstruction of the building with renovated emergency access and new systems. But what had really been rebuilt was the way people looked at it. Visits to James increased. Neighborhood children knocked on his door with questions. Were you really from the war? Is it true that you saved people by yourself? What did you feel in there? He smiled, but didn't answer in detail. Sometimes he would just say, "Courage is when we do things, even when we are afraid." At one of these meetings, a boy handed him a small wooden box. "I made it in carpentry class, so you can save your coin." James opened the box. It was simple, with the inside lined with blue fabric. He carefully put the coin in, closed the lid, looked at the boy and asked, "Why blue?" "Because blue is the color of a clear sky. And after the fire, the sky became clear because of you." The answer made him feel like hell inside, but he just nodded and held the boy's shoulder affectionately. Weeks later, a group of neighbors gathered in the yard and affixed a small bronze plaque to the front wall. On it was written, "In memory of the courage that does not shout, but leads. James R. Cole, 5th Rescue Unit, never left anyone behind." James didn't go to the event. He stood at the third-floor window, watching everything from afar as he always did. A cup of coffee in his hand, a cap on his head, a world of memories in his eyes. But there was something different that day. A peace he carried in his chest, rare, profound. The feeling that, even after so much time, what he was, what he believed, still had a place in the world. And every now and then, when the elevator was empty and the building was silent, someone swore they heard his voice whispering in the hallway. Training is not for the past. It is for when the world forgets what courage is. Comment here, courage that does not retire, because what James left in that city cannot be erased. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And honestly, that says a lot about the kind of person you are. Someone who listens with an open heart, who values what really matters, and who understands the power of a well-told story. So, if this content made you think, remember, or feel something true, if it left something alive inside you, leave a like. This shows me that it's worth continuing to bring stories like this, full of soul, courage, and meaning. And if you want to follow more journeys like James's, where every detail carries a hidden truth, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't forget those who fought. We revive what the world tries to bury. To show that you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "Honor does not retire." I will know that you have walked with me this far, and that makes all the difference. And since the journey doesn't stop, there's a video here that completes it all with another story that deserves to be heard. Click and continue with me there.